But when we got there, we found that she was on death's door. And through our 40 plus years of clinical experience and training, we saved her life, and we got her into a big city emerge. We gave them an early pre-notification so that we could roll right into a high acuity room. There's a team waiting for us, and we just knocked it out of the park. And afterwards, in the ambulance, as we were writing our notes, we're kind of high-fiving and debriefing the call and kind of congratulating each other. And we got a call from our supervisor saying that a charge nurse had lodged a complaint about us not wearing our PPE properly. So something wasn't tied up, or maybe someone's glasses were up instead of down. And so this is just a little paper cut. This is just to give you an example of what it's like to work in this system. It's constantly little jabs like that all day long. You could do the best job. You could save the life. The patient could write a 10 out of 10 review. You've knocked everything out of the park, but you're not completely 100% compliant with some new policy that was just enacted a few days ago that you might not even be aware of. Mm-hmm. And you get judged on that. So this has created a very toxic work environment. And it's always been this way. Of course, anytime you have top-down bureaucracy, it's all about institutional and bureaucratic compliance. That's kind of the name of the game, more than it is about patient care. But now that's been ramped up on steroids over the past two years, as every COVID care and manager now sees it as their job to write new sets of rules and enforce compliance. So it's a terrible place to work right now.
Adam Sos here for Rebel News, and I am joined by Tim Moen, a paramedic, firefighter, emergency responder, and he is going to join us to talk about a very heartbreaking story that just took place. We've covered this story of a paramedic who passed away in the line of duty last week, unable to get ambulance care to him in adequate amount of time. Tim Moen himself, a first-line responder, knew this paramedic. So I guess first off, Tim, thanks for joining me. Could you just, for those people unfamiliar with the story, fill everybody in on exactly what happened?
Yeah, well, Mike Hart, who is a very well-respected paramedic, very well-known and beloved paramedic in the province. I mean, this guy worked so many jobs in emergency services and knew so many people and touched so many people's lives. He sat on the regulating body, the College of Paramedics in Alberta, and was heavily involved in trying to make things better for EMS. Just a well-loved guy. He was, my understanding, and I understand this is third-hand information. It's coming from a variety of sources, so take it with a bit of a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that Mike was working a shift in an urgent care center in Airdrie. Now, why are paramedics working in urgent care centers? I mean, essentially, urgent care centers aren't equipped the same way emergency departments are. Mm-hmm. Quite often they're family physicians and some nurses that don't have a lot of acute care experience. And so sometimes they supplement this lack of acute care experience with paramedics who are very adept and good at running acute calls, cardiac arrest calls. And of course, in an urgent care center, most acute cases get shipped out by ambulance immediately to an emergency department. They're more of a walk-in clinic after hours type thing. So my understanding is Mike was working the night shift there. He collapsed from a sudden cardiac event. And of course, they're not fully equipped to deal with that. Mike would have been one of the people that would have been dealing with the cardiac arrest that happened there. And then their protocol, from my understanding, is that they call 911 immediately because they're not set up to run cardiac arrests. I think they have a nurse and two doctors. And usually when you talk about a code team in a hospital or even in the field in EMS, we're dealing with at least 7 team members to properly run a code effectively. Mm-hmm. So they called 911. They got a fire department to respond, and the fire department helped them out. But then it was like, okay, where's the ambulance? Where's the ambulance to help us out here to bring that acute care level to Mike and to get him to the nearest emergency department where he can get the top-notch care? And that ambulance was 30 minutes away. And so Mike tragically perished, and it set the EMS world abuzz. Paramedics are pissed off. This has been, we can talk about what has led to this displeasure, but this is like the straw that broke the camel's back, because Mike was beloved. He gave so much to the system that seems to have left him essentially to die. Mm-hmm. And so people are rightfully mad about this. Yeah. AHS shortly thereafter put out a tweet that said this wasn't had nothing to do with lack of resources. Not sure what that vague tweet meant, but to people in the know, the people that were there on the scene, that pissed them off because they were calling and begging for resources that weren't there, that weren't in the community. An EMS unit with experienced paramedics at the advanced life support level who are capable of running codes and managing them and getting them to high level definitive care. They weren't there. So that definitive care was not there. And then AHS further to kind of fait accompli the gaslighting, said anyone who's having any issues, please contact our mental health support, employee mental health support at this number, as if our being upset was an us problem and not justified, or something like that. So that's where we're at. That was the situation that has led to where we're at, and why you have a lot of pissed off paramedics and first responders right now.
Well, there are no doubt a number of factors contributing to frontline workers being upset. We obviously don't have time to get into all of them, but I think if there's any solace for Mike's family, for other paramedics, for EMS workers, is that I don't think that the loss of his life will be in vain. I think this is very much sort of a catharsis for people to say enough is enough and we need change. Correct me if I'm wrong, but was there not sort of a status alert for the area that there weren't ambulances available the same day or the day prior to this happening, which kind of contradicts AHS saying there wasn't a supply issue?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, there are what we call code reds all the time. I mean, these happen on a daily basis. They happen in different areas. I'm not sure what was going on in Calgary at that time. All I know is that the nearest available unit was coming from downtown Calgary, and it was about 30 minutes away. So, the system is chronically short-staffed, chronically under-resourced. And so, I'm sure from AHS's perspective, they said, well, there was a nurse and two doctors, or a doctor and two nurses there. So there was resources. He was right in an urgent care center, which, I mean, imagine had he been at home or something like that, he would have had no chance whatsoever. So yes, there were some resources there. Yes, the fire department came. Yes, there was a doctor and nurses, and care was being given to Mike. But the level of care one would expect in that situation wasn't there, and he deserved better.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially for one of their own. We've talked frequently, a police under fire, all units respond. This, a paramedic, one of the people who's out there saving lives, goes down. And then it only adds insult to injury, to death, in fact, in this case, that after that, they aren't saying the obvious sane response. The only thing to say in this situation is we need to be better. We need to dedicate more resources to this. Paramedics who are going through so much. I don't think people realize, like, I've done social work in the past, I've done some stuff, but the things that paramedics see on a day-to-day basis, they are heroes dealing with stuff most of us will never imagine in a lifetime. And I think for them to hope that an ambulance might be available if anything should ever happen to them is baseline. This speaks to a broader failure from AHS from the top down. And there's been nonstop talk lately as a result of COVID-19 that the system is on the brink of collapse. But I think that the system has been on the brink of collapse. We've been seeing these code reds. We've been seeing critical mass issues that there's not enough ambulances available for years now. This isn't a new problem. Is that right?
No, that's right. I mean, AHS, the province, took over emergency medical services in 2009. And, I spoke out at the time that this actually got me involved in politics. And I eventually went on to become leader of the Libertarian Party. But it started with this issue of emergency services. I was a firefighter paramedic working in Fort McMurray at the time. And I could see no benefit whatsoever to stripping our department and our community of control over its essential resources, its essential workers, its essential service of emergency medical services. And I predicted that we're going to see more code reds because anytime, I mean, this is a repetitive historical pattern, right? You centralize and bureaucratize services and make one giant monolithic kind of bureaucracy. And you start to see inefficiencies and gaps in care and lowering standards of care. And so this system was stressed from day one. And we had code reds throughout the province from day one. And that hasn't gotten any better. In fact, it's gotten worse. And we've been trying to sound the alarm on this for years and years. But now under the last 2 years of the COVID regime, we're seeing a breaking point. You know, that all of the elements that have stressed the system over the past few years have been given steroids over the past 2 years. And what are those things I'm talking about? Well, we have a borderless system now, which sounds good on paper. You know, an ambulance is an ambulance. It should respond to whatever emergency is closest. But what ends up happening is, because you're not attached to a community per se anymore, all the communities around the big cities, the ambulances empty out and go where all the emergencies are, which happen to be in the big cities, leaving these communities undefended. And then they add fuel to that fire. Now the paramedics aren't employees of the community. They are employees of AHS. So they are able to lighten the load, the extreme workload of nurses in emerge departments who are always overwhelmed and busy. And so we sit there with our patients for hours sometimes in the hallway because, the nurses are too busy to take them. And, you know, in the past, when we were attached to a community and it was run by municipalities, our supervisor would be on the phone to a charge nurse saying, you've got to get that patient offloaded. We got to get our ambulances back in our community to defend it. We've got no units. And the nurses would find a way and they'd get it, but that pressure no longer exists. And so, you know, we're just seen as part of the healthcare system and borderless. And so we're stuck there in the hospital. Now add to that as well, you know, when these services are free and the government continually harps on you that you aren't responsible for your health, you're not in any way a good judge of your own healthcare, and trust the experts and the scientists to make your decisions. Well, the level of acuity starts to drop. So we start to see more and more people call for less and less acute things because it's free and because, well, you know, let's just check it out. Let's let the experts check this out. So we err on the side of caution and transport to emerge departments. And of course, these super low acuity patients with stuck farts and stubbed toes or whatever they have, they're not going to get seen at the top of the list. So we are sit there and we can't just abandon them. So we have to sit there with them and keep them company for hours until they move up the list and their triage, they come up to the top of the triage line and get seen. So all these things add up to overutilization of the system. And then you add to that this top-down bureaucratic control that values compliance more than it does value good patient experience and good patient care. And to just give you an example of that, the other week, my colleagues and I responded to this patient who was in severe distress. She was on death's door. That's not what we were dispatched to. We got a less acute picture from our dispatched notes. But when we got there, we found that she was on death's door. And through our 40 plus years of clinical experience and training, we saved her life and we got her into a big city emerge. We gave them an early pre-notification so that we could roll right into a high acuity room. There's a team waiting for us. And we just knocked it out of the park. And afterwards in the ambulance, as we were writing our notes, we're kind of high-fiving and debriefing the call and kind of congratulating each other. And we got a call from our supervisor saying that a charge nurse had lodged a complaint about us not wearing our PPE properly. So something wasn't tied up, or maybe someone's glasses were up instead of down. And so this is just a little paper cut. This is just to give you an example of what it's like to work in this system. It's constantly little jabs like that all day long. You could do the best job. You could save the life. The patient could write a 10 out of 10 review. You've knocked everything out of the park, but you're not completely 100% compliant with some new policy that was just enacted a few days ago that you might not even be aware of. And you get judged on that. So this has created a very toxic work environment. And it's always been this way. Of course, anytime you have top-down bureaucracy, it's all about institutional and bureaucratic compliance. That's kind of the name of the game, more than it is about patient care. But now that's been ramped up on steroids over the past two years as every COVID care and manager now sees it as their job to write new sets of rules and enforce compliance. So it's a terrible place to work right now. And this is why right now, at one point this summer, I heard, you'll never find this stat published anywhere, but we heard from reliable sources that up to a third of paramedics in the Edmonton metro area were off on stress leave. And so of course you can't staff all your trucks, and you've got increasing call volume because of all these other cultural phenomena I talked about, and emergencies of isolation and whatnot. And now you are extremely under-resourced and short-staffed, and it's left to quite often contract providers like municipal fire departments and other contract providers to fill in the gaps and to buoy up the system. And so now we're burning everyone out. Now add to that, I'm losing colleagues because of this vaccine mandate. And, at a time where I myself, I have COVID right now. I'm fully vaccinated, yet I have COVID. I'm sidelined for at least 2 weeks until I'm symptom free. A lot of my colleagues are COVID testing right now because they're having symptoms. I suspect there's going to be a lot of health workers off in the not too distant future who are with this Omicron surge. And we're going to be even more understaffed. And at this time is when you're choosing to let go of healthcare workers. It's absolute madness.
Well, and you're taking people who are dealing with, like I said, stresses and job circumstances most of us will never experience in a lifetime, putting them through stress. You've bureaucratized and then legislated the thing into almost utter ineffectiveness, which is what bureaucracies tend to do. Those people are at their breaking point. Then you start terminating all their friends when there's crises, shortages. And then I'm hoping that as much as the passing of Mike is an extreme tragedy, that people really wake up and they don't allow that to be in vain, because the government, Alberta Health Services, society at large, the demands on paramedics are not reasonable at this point in time by any metric whatsoever. And this perhaps illustrates that in a dramatic way, that they weren't able to get somebody there to help one of their own, so that he does not pass simply in vain and this is forgotten. Finally, if you wouldn't mind, what can be done to fix this situation? What can be done to make it right? And what can government officials, AHS, what can everyone do to honor Mike's legacy after everything he gave to the community?
Yeah, well, this needs to be fixed. That's the only proper way to honor Mike's legacy, and I think a way to do that is to look at ways of decentralizing, once again, putting it back in the hands of municipalities and letting local authorities control the resources rather than these giant faceless, soulless bureaucracies. So that's going to require politicians and movements to work together. It's not an easy thing to do. Part of the problem is that Alberta Health's legislation is been harmonized to the Canada Health Act, and the Canada Health Act basically says, the province is the sole purveyor of healthcare. And so, for example, when this pandemic started, I had spent a year as a project manager trying to develop a community paramedic program where I go to patients' doors. These are seniors with low mobility, where we can bring paramedics right into their house to get on top of health problems before they become a problem. You start developing a cough, let's get some blood work done. Let's contact your primary physician. Let's get you a prescription for some antibiotics to prevent this from developing into a life-threatening pneumonia, things like that. And of course, when the pandemic hit, this was a perfect opportunity because everyone was scared to go to Emerge. We didn't want people in Emerge. But they still needed healthcare, and of course that is banned. It's outlawed. You can't do that without AHS's permission, and good luck getting that permission. So a year's worth of work had gone down the drain because we couldn't get permission. So we need to look at ways of legalizing healthcare is another thing, right? So we need to decentralize control over these existing resources. We need to look at ways of legalizing healthcare so that healthcare workers are free to start enterprises that serve their community, that serve paying, willing customers, or even do charity work. And this is prohibited right now. So we need adept politicians. I know Brian Jean has been making a lot of noise and been supportive. He's talking about taking on this AHS bureaucracy. Maybe we'll see some movement within the UCP as that picks up steam. But there's a growing movement of pissed off people that are motivated to do something. We're starting to see the unions get on board with this. The Alberta Urban Municipalities Association recently met, and they passed a motion to support decentralizing dispatch services. You'll remember that Fort McMurray and Lethbridge and a few other places lost their 911 dispatch services earlier this year. And so urban municipalities seem to fight back. And, I think we're going to start to see a shift here. We've got a new mayor in Fort McMurray and a fire chief who are holding the line. Sandy Bowman is the mayor, Jody Butts is the fire chief, and these people are ready to fight the fight with AHS. So we're starting to see some movement. So look for opportunities to support good politicians, good mayors, good, chiefs, good leaders, and get ready to pour some money and votes into fixing this problem.
Tim Moen, thank you so much for the update. It's great to hear from a fellow emergency responder on this heartbreaking story. Clearly, it sent ripples through not just the paramedics and firefighters communities, but among all Albertans, hoping that this will be a clarion call of sorts to do something to make a change. Tim, as always, I want to thank you so much for joining us with this update and your personal insight, and to the family of Mike Hart and to the fellow frontline emergency responders, our sincerest condolences and prayers are certainly with you at this time. As always, for everyone out there, I want to thank you for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sos.
Continuing to stand after months and months against vaccine mandates and for medical freedom. If you want to support these people's efforts and support the legal battle against this medical tyranny, go to fightvaccinepassports.com.